David Guida says, how can high school teachers best promote virtue, cultivate morality, and tackle the meaning crisis in the face of an increasingly chaotic, violent, and dehumanized future? Well, I would say it isn't obvious to me that the future is increasingly chaotic, violent, and dehumanized. That the past was pretty rough. Now, the future is definitely ill-defined. We don't know what's going to happen, and I think maybe that's more true in a general sense than it ever has been in the history of mankind. But I don't necessarily think that there's reasons to be particularly pessimistic. However, the first part of the question, I think, is well worth addressing. How can high school teachers best promote virtue, cultivate morality, and tackle the meaning crisis? Well, I think the best way that people in general promote virtue and cultivate morality is by promoting virtue and cultivating morality within their own life. But I think that in order to do that for yourself, and then also in order to transmit that information to your students, you have to understand that morality isn't a set of injunctions of the nature of don't ever do anything impulsive that you like, which is generally how morality is put forth. You think about morality as something that a puritanical person might preach, and that it has to do mostly with self-control and self-constraint. And I think that that's a very shallow vision of morality. I think the way that you convince people to act morally, if that's something that you're interested in doing, is to meditate on the utility of the truth. Because I think the highest form of morality is following the truth. So you might say, well, why would you bother following what's true? And the answer to that, I think, is quite straightforward. If you follow what's false, then you're going to end up somewhere that you weren't planning to go, and the probability that that's going to be good is low. I mean, following what's false is like attempting to use the wrong map for the territory that you occupy. And if your eyes are open and you pay attention, then the probability that you'll be able to maneuver around the terrible sharp obstacles that will emerge in front of you is that much higher. And so when you're having a serious discussion about morality with people, there's a couple of points that you make to begin with. It's like, and these are fundamental points. One would be, do you want things to be better, or do you want things to be worse? And you might assume that people are going to automatically answer that they'd rather have things better, but that's not so self-evident, because to make things better usually requires that you adopt a tremendous amount of responsibility, and that's effortful and difficult and frightening. And the buck sort of stops with you, which is also part of what makes it terrifying. But if you do want things to be better, and you have your mind straight and oriented in that direction, then the truth is your best possible guide, because it'll help you get to that point. So I think one of the things that people who talk about morality fail to understand is that it's not abstract, it's practical. Morality is precisely what's proved to be most practical over the longest possible span of time. It's sort of like the moral act is what's best, all things considered. And part of the reason that it's necessary for people to follow conventional rules is because convention is part of the wisdom of mankind, and the wisdom of mankind has basically said, all things considered, here's a pathway that you could follow that is going to work out in principle best for you. And so one of the considerations there, speaking in terms of convention, is the standard path through life, say in Western culture, has been to grow up, to form an intimate relationship of some stability, to do something productive that other people approve of and will trade with you for, to raise children, and to establish yourself in a community. And the reason that that's conventional morality is because that's not such a bad deal compared to most of the alternatives. And if you can pull all those things off properly, then there's a reasonable chance that you'll at least have a life that isn't completely full of unbearable suffering with nothing positive in it, but there's also a reasonable possibility that you'll have a good life. And so then you might want to try to do that correctly. Why act morally? Why act in a virtuous manner? Because it's in your interest and it's in everyone else's interest as well. And so that seems like a good deal. Now, it will mean that you'll have to put off certain forms of impulsive pleasure. But the problem often with impulsive pleasure is that, well, you have pleasure at haste and you repent at leisure. And so part of what standard morality is trying to do is to inform you about how you might act in the present, so that the present is acceptable, but so that tomorrow is also good, and next week is also good, and next month is also good, and next year is also good, and for you and for your family and for your community, for this broad swath of humanity. And partly what you ask people, you ask high school students is, well, do they want to be part of that, or do they want to do something else? And if they want to do something else, maybe they want to make things worse, well, they should think that through, because that's just not a very good plan. You know, unless your goal is to make the world a more miserable place. And, you know, often people's goals are precisely that.